In today's video, we're going to be refreshing the Sega Nomad by recapping it and adding a new LCD. The Sega Nomad is one of the most versatile handhelds of its time. It's essentially a Sega Genesis packed into a handheld form that can be docked to a television and played using an external controller. Like most Sega consoles of its time, it suffers from two main setbacks: bad capacitors and poor LCD technology. Luckily, there are kits readily available to solve both problems. Our parts that we'll be using today come from Console 5. The recap kit includes roughly 35 capacitors, 3 being through-hole style while the remaining being SMD style. Our LCD kit includes one LCD, an LCD control board, the breakout cable, and a 3D printed bracket. Let's start first by testing the console and then swapping out all the capacitors. The Nomad that we're working with today powers on properly, has sound, and plays the games properly. That's about it though, because that screen has seen better days. In order to open up the system, you'll need to remove the 4 Phillips screws in the back and the 1 remaining security bit screw like found on the Game Gear. Once they are removed, you can open up the console top down like a book. One side contains the cartridge slot reader, while the other contains the motherboard, LCD, speaker, and buttons. While there are capacitors that need to be swapped on either side of the console, we'll actually work hardest to easiest and start with the motherboard. The motherboard is removed by disconnecting the 3 wiring harnesses and removing the 3 remaining Phillips screws. It can then be gently lifted out. The motherboard contains 28 SMD style capacitors and 3 through-hole style capacitors. To remove SMD style capacitors, I add a little flux to either leg and work back and forth between legs with my soldering iron while gently lifting the capacitor from the pads. Some prefer to go the more aggressive route and use needle nose pliers to gently twist the capacitor off until it breaks. While both methods work and one may be more controversial, I actually prefer my method. After the capacitor is free, I wick away the remaining solder, clean it with IPA, and tin each pad for the new capacitor. In order to solder them on, I work one leg at a time and finally add pressure at the top to flatten the connection. With 28 SMD style capacitors to swap, I find it easiest to take a picture of the entire board first for reference and then work through the entire board together. I remove them all, I clean them all, I tin all the pads, and then I solder them all on. I find this to be a lot smoother than just working one by one. After the SMD capacitors are done, we can move on to the 3 remaining through-hole capacitors. Luckily, these are a lot easier to work with. I heat each leg separately while working out the capacitor on the other side of the motherboard. Once it's free, I wick away the excess solder, install the new capacitor, solder it into place, and then trim away the legs. The one thing to always be mindful of when installing capacitors is correct orientation. To find the negative leg on an SMD style capacitor, you look for the black side, while on through-hole capacitors you find the 0 stripe. Now that the motherboard is recapped, let's move on to the cartridge side. The cartridge board is held in by 8 visible screws above the shield and 2 below it. Once it's free, you can lift the board out and replace the 4 remaining capacitors. After all the capacitors are in place, we can button up the console and test before we put in the new LCD. Everything looks to be in working order, so let's jump to installing the LCD. Luckily, we just need to be focusing in on the motherboard side. We start by disconnecting the bracket, removing the tape, desoldering the LCD from the board, and setting it to the side. Next up is wiring up the controller board. It ships with a connector and wiring harness. The wiring harness can be clipped on one end and the wires stripped back. These wires are going to be the ones that we use to connect to the motherboard. We have 4 lines we need to pull to. Red is for power, black is for ground, yellow is for composite video, and white is for ground for composite video. Once the lines are soldered into place, connect the LCD to the controller board and test. Everything looks good, so we'll move on to mounting it into place. Console 5 did a really good job building this bracket. It houses all the parts and utilizes the stock mounting holes. I found it easiest to connect the LCD to the LCD controller board and slide the LCD into the bracket. I then screwed the bracket into place and then connected the final breakout cable. All that's left to do is reassemble, clean, and test. With these two mods, we really upgraded an already great handheld. Not to mention, we extended its life significantly. Although the mod takes a little bit of time, the results speak for themselves. If you're looking to upgrade your Sega Nomad or any other console, you can find me at dvgamerepair.com. Or if you're in the Colorado Springs area, you can find my office at Raven Retro Games. Keep posted on my channel for more mods and repairs, and remember, a like and subscribe are always appreciated. Thank you again for your support, and we will catch you guys later.